Hello to everybody, and welcome to History Matters, and so does coffee. Um, Today we're going to be talking, in a sense, about naysayers. I had like more than one title go floating through my head. I had a hard time coming up with a title. I will explain why once we get started, but in one way or another, I want to talk about some of the things that people have been throwing at me about why some of the things I've been saying about resisting uh, don't matter. I'm not going to put up with resistance not mattering. And so I really think it's important to address these things because some of them are very tempting. But before I get into that at all, I turn to my wonderful partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History, and I'm joining you today. I'm in a hotel in New York because we're attending the AHA, American Historical Association conference. So that's why you don't see Jessica popping in, because Jessica's on her way here to the conference. But
Everybody's in New York except
I
me.
I know, it's so weird. I was like, I want to grab coffee with Joanne. I'm like, wait, she's in Connecticut. We can't do that. And she's packing. But so here's how this works. Joanne's going to talk about today's topic for about 30 minutes. And then I'm going to come back and I'll look for your questions down below in the Q&A. The chat is on fire. Everybody's welcoming each other back after the new year. And that's awesome. And we encourage that in both Facebook and Zoom land. But if you have questions for today's topic, we want those to go in the Q&A so we're sure to find them. And I'll be back in about 30 minutes.
Excellent. And for those of you who are new here, please say so in chat. Tell folks that you're here for the first or one of the first times, and you will receive a robust welcome from the History Matters community that is really a community by this point because we've been doing this forever. We're moving up to our 250th episode, which is coming up next week, I think. So, I mean, come on, I will believe that at home you are applauding for this simple fact that that's where we're moving towards. Okay, so let me talk about today's episode. I was desperately trying to figure out last night what I wanted to call this episode. And I think I started with something like bracing for impact, some not so useful things. I can't even remember. And I can't remember suggesting it was a bad title. And what I meant was a version of what I started out by saying, which is I've been interested to see some of what people have been saying in response to some of what feels to me like some pretty basic things to think about, to try for, that there have been people who are just essentially shooting down these ideas. And not that it's a huge trend, but there's enough of it out there that I felt like I wanted to address this right now going into the new year as we're essentially bracing for impact, but thinking about where we are as the new year starts. And I should say, Happy New Year, everybody. I should have started with that. At any rate, I think the final title they came up with was something about, it was naysayers. Shut up. It was maybe a message to naysayers. Shut up. Which is a ruder version of what I started out by saying, which is, come on, if every time someone says, we need to think about this, we need to think about that, that someone comes back and says, oh, shut up, it won't work. That's not useful. Okay, now I want to start out, though, before I plunge into that, by saying very clearly what I'm not saying. Because the risk of my saying, oh, shut up, naysayers, is you're going to think I'm saying, it's not so bad. It's going to be okay. That's not what I'm saying. And surely after the years at this point that I've spent talking about the ways in which democracy is under attack, I'm really not saying naysayers shut up because it's all going to be okay. That is not what I think. So I want to start out by saying that very clearly. I am not saying there's nothing to worry about. There's a lot to worry about. And as a matter of fact, that's precisely why I want to address this topic going into the new year. We really need to think about options, as many as we can, push back in any way we can, organize for opposition any way we can. And that's, in a sense, part of what I'm going to be talking about today. So what I'm not saying is it's all going to be okay. Naysayers, shut up and watch TV. I am not saying that. We are really looking at, as a historian, it's very hard for me to say unprecedented, but we are moving into highly contingent times when it's really unclear on a certain level what's going to happen. It's very clear in some ways what's going to happen. We have people who are not really keen necessarily on the norms, rules, and standards of democratic governance, want to be authoritarians coming into power. That's pretty clear. What's going to happen, what they're going to be able to do versus what they want to do, that's a question, and I'm not going to try to answer that as a historian. However, not saying that we should all not worry. But what I am saying is we can't assume that there's no hope, that there's nothing we can do, that the game is over, that we're all sunk, that democracy is permanently dead, that basically we should feel paralyzed, pointless, useless because there's nothing to be done. Now, I will never believe that. I will never believe that. I will be pushing as long as I can possibly be pushing back. However, that kind of thinking is nothing but surrender as far as I'm concerned. If you're already saying there's nothing we can do, that's surrender. And that at this point is not only pointless, it's dangerous. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what I wish was happening right now in relation to what people are saying could never happen. But at any rate, don't assume that there's no hope, we're all doomed, and there's nothing we can do, so you might as well shut up. Opposition matters, pushing back matters, resistance matters, getting in the way matters. All of this matters supremely. And I'm going to end up on this point. I'll mention it here. No matter how trivial it may seem, it matters. I'll circle back to that. Okay. So I want to touch on the fact that I mentioned a moment ago, because how could I not? Because contingency, right? We really are moving into times where we just don't know what's going to come. We have a sense, right? We're watching the chipping away, the erosion of some of our fundamental democratic structures, standards, rules, ideals. What happens when one of the two major parties isn't fully dedicated to democratic rule, democratic small d, government by the people? What happens when that is the case? Because that's the case now to a pretty extreme degree. What happens? We're going to find out, but we should be part of the answer to that question. We should be trying to push back against whatever the heck happens. So that's where I want to start. Now, number one thing that a lot of people have said, and this has been in response to my saying the Democrats need to be an opposition party. They can't be thinking about politics as normal. And a number of people responded saying, some politely and some less than politely, but mostly politely. Like, for example, someone said, you're an intelligent person. How can you assume that the Democrats are going to do anything? How can you give people hope that the Democrats are going to do anything? I mean, you shouldn't be giving out false hope like that. Okay, so on the one hand, I understand that point, that it's been remarkable to see the degree to which now, even, in recent weeks, it does not appear that we're getting much pushback from the Democratic Party, much organization, much of any kind of a message, much of anything, other than President Biden trying to do what he can do in the waning days of his presidency. We're not seeing a lot of the Democratic Party stepping up in a noticeable way that the public can see and understand to push back or show that they're preparing to push back. And to me, that's a problem. That's, to me, what should be happening now. It should be loud, it should be obvious, it shouldn't be crazy outrageous yet, but it should be strong. Like, if you're going to be this kind of party, if you're going to basically chip away at X, Y, and Z, as you appear to be doing, Project 2025 and anything else, they'd have to be specific, then we're going to oppose that. We're not going to sit back and assume that this is a moment of politics as normal because you're not acting like it's a moment of politics as normal. So we are going to push back. We are going to oppose what seems undemocratic on the other side, and we're going to talk to the American people about it. We're going to inform them about what's going on in a factual way, and we're going to come up with ways to oppose it. Okay, that's what I wish I were seeing now. We're kind of not. So I understand why people are saying, oh, you're an intelligent person, Joanne. How can you possibly say that the Democrats are going to be of assistance? But here is what I think. And this gets back to the whole opposition party idea, which I've been talking about a lot because I think it's a wonderful idea. Do I think anyone is going to grab onto it? I have no idea. I'm a historian. I can guess at the future. I talk about the past. So in this case, there are enough people talking about it that at least it's getting airplay. It's out there. What it would mean for the Democrats to act that way, to understand that this isn't politics as normal, that they need to be an opposition party targeted on tracking what the people in power are doing in a really direct, precise way, reporting on that to each other and finding a way to report on that to the public that actually is coherent to the public. I'm going to come back to that shortly. And then doing everything they can to oppose that, as opposed to sort of assuming, well, behind the scenes we'll compromise. Behind the scenes we'll compromise is politics as normal. We're not in a politics as normal moment. And so speaking as a political historian who has spent my career studying American politics and in one way or another, certainly in recent times, the assumption that we have a two-party system and that debate and compromise is at the core of what we do, debate and compromise doesn't seem to be likely on a lot of levels at the moment. And so as a political historian, what I'm saying is be creative about how our political process is working right now. The Republican Party is not the normal Republican Party. I've said before in the past year that the Republican Party in many ways is dead. Now it's the MAGA Party, and it's a different kind of entity with different kind of assumptions about what they should be doing, with different kind of adherence or lack of adherence to standards and norms. Whatever we have now, it is not the Republican Party, and it is not a party in the way that we tend to define parties. The Democratic Party is kind of acting like a party, but to do that in the face of what we're seeing on the other side doesn't really make sense to me. So again, rather than saying, as some have said to me, why are you telling people there's any hope with the Democratic Party? I don't know what they will do, what they can do, what they want to do. I can't predict how they're going to respond. But what I can say, and what I will continue to say, is that they need to rethink how they operate as a party. Will they do that? I don't know. They're sort of staying in motion and resisting change. Talk about resistance. That's strong. That's powerful. And particularly given that we have a lot of senior politicians in charge of the Democratic Party who have been in operation for a long time, have seen how things work, have seemingly confidence that it's going to continue to work that way. It's part of why I think part of shifting a little bit, and this isn't even particularly, I don't want to say dramatic. It's not a fundamental, huge foundational change to allow a younger generation of historians to get in the mix, to have loud voices, to give them responsibility, to show that the Democratic Party is actually a party that is in the moment and not just devoted to what they've been doing in the past. And, there are any number of people who people point to, Jamie Raskin, AOC, Jasmine Crockett, people who have been assertive and loud and willing to talk about abnormalities of the moment in a direct way that people can hear, that is aimed at the public in a way that someone standing up behind a podium at a press conference, that's a different thing entirely. And I'm not saying that shouldn't happen, but that can't be all that happens right now on the side of the Democrats. They can't just assume we shall get up at a podium and have a press conference. This moment requires creativity in how politics is working on the part of people who are going to be opposing and resisting. So don't yell at me and say how in the world can you say that the Democrats are going to do anything? I say, I don't know if they're going to adapt, but what I can do is talk about it, push for it, write about it, encourage other people to do the same. Will it have an impact? I don't know, but I'm not going to stop saying it, and I'm not going to stop talking about it because I'm not the only one. And that in and of itself, to me, is significant. So, number one, stop telling me that there's no hope with the Democrats. There is hope. It just depends on what some people within that party are willing to do. Okay. Other things that people have been saying in the recent past is shut up about democracy. Just stop. I think someone out there in social media land called it vapid, right? Vapid ranting about democracy, right? Just pontificating, huffing and puffing about democracy. Shut up. Now, I have a multiple sided response to that. On the one hand, I do think, and I do agree with part of what that's saying, which is all the people like me who are saying democracy's dying, that particular message, as much as it spoke to our souls, did not speak to the souls of a lot of other people. They didn't necessarily understand what that meant. They don't necessarily understand really what democracy means. That even though that felt like a grab you in the gut kind of reality to a lot of people, it didn't feel that way to a lot of people. So if part of what these particular naysayers are saying is stop just huffing and puffing about democracy, I get it, right? We can't keep just doing that. That obviously didn't, it had some power, but it didn't have enough. So we need to rethink how we're communicating to people in a general way where we are and what's going to be happening. And we shouldn't be doing that, as I said a moment ago, with people standing behind podiums giving press conferences. We shouldn't be doing that with policy wonk, here's what the party stands for. We shall help the American people. We shouldn't resort to what sounds like normal droning rhetoric or policy details, because it will be very, very, very easy to drown that out. It's almost welcoming to drown that out. So I think, and I'm not the person to come up with the solution, but I think it's going to be really important for people to find ways of talking about what's happening and talking about what's being changed or what's being destroyed or removed in a very coherent, direct way, right? Like a way that isn't about policy, a way that isn't about democracy writ large, although I'm going to keep talking about what democracy is, folks, because we need to know. But I could have told you years ago that Americans kind of fundamentally don't understand what democracy is. I've talked before about how I don't allow my students to write in their papers democracy, which is throwing around a lot of words, democracy, liberty, freedom, with absolutely no meaning at all. And I think that's easy to do. But we need to find a way to be more specific. For example, do you think that you should have a right to get access ultimately to the money that you've been putting away in Social Security for years and years and years? Don't you think that you deserve ultimately to get access to that, to rely on that in your retirement years? A lot of us are. I'm hoping it's going to be there. Well, anything this party does that suggests they're coming for it, talk about that, make that clear. Or alternately, there were little stories floating around about people who voted for Trump who are now saying, wait a minute, is it coming? Are they coming for my health care? Wait a minute, aren't they going to help the prices of food? Okay, so point it out. Guess what? They did X, Y, and Z today, and that might affect healthcare. Don't speak in a general way. Don't be ranty. They're coming for healthcare. Be specific. Talk about what they're doing. They're doing X, Y, and Z, and here's what that's going to do, and here's how that's going to affect you. Again, I don't have the answers here, and I'm going to be figuring them out with everybody else as we move ahead. But we have to find a way to communicate the reality of what's happening right now without overblown claims that people will drown out, without policy wonk, underwhelming claims that people will drown out, but in a way that makes it clear what's really happening. We did not necessarily do that well enough building up to this moment. We darn well better find a better way to do that now. Same thing, healthcare. You think you ought to be able to afford healthcare, generally speaking? Are you like at least happy with what you have, but wanting it to be better? Well, guess what? That because of X, Y, and Z on this side, that's going to change. And if you can quote people, so and so said this, so and so said that. Again, I can hear. I'm thinking like a scholar or a historian, and what that means is like when you write a book, or at least for me, when I write a book, what I'm thinking about constantly is, okay, who's going to try and shoot this idea down? Who's going to try and shoot this idea down? And I have usually a file, a list of things people are going to throw at me when this book comes out. And those go into the introduction, right? The introduction of the book is where I can say things like, yeah, well, I know you're going to say this, but guess what? No, you probably think this, but nope, that's not the case either. So I'm here speaking to you and imagining all of the ways in which people are like, oh, yeah, coming back at me. I get it. I do. But I'm not going to sit here and say there's no hope, there's nothing we can do. The Democrats are useless. We can't communicate this effectively to the public in any way. That's just surrendering. We got to figure it out, folks. And we should be doing that now, but we still have to do it. Another thing that people have said to me in recent weeks, words don't matter. Why in the world are you telling people to speak out, speak up? Words don't matter. They haven't up until now, they don't. Which is another way of saying, oh, just shut up, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't help. It's just words. Well, I really don't believe that's the case. On the one hand, I get it. I understand why people are saying that. Because words are words are words, and there's a lot of words thrown around, and it seems like none of them really have much impact at all. But if you fundamentally believe that words don't matter, again, you've moved yourself right into the, well, I guess there's nothing we can do. So I guess we'll just sit here being quiet while things happen. I don't know the magical combination of words, the kinds of messages that matter. What I do know is that we should be speaking up, pushing back, resisting, getting in the way in every possible way that we can imagine. And I'm not talking about violence, but I'm talking about opposition. And we should not assume, and this is what I mentioned at the beginning, we should not assume that something that seems trivial or local or individual doesn't matter. We should not assume it doesn't matter, because it does, particularly if we all come together and do this, organize locally, communities. I'm going to come back to community, and I am. But at any rate, to say that words don't matter, that nothing you say matters, that nothing you do matters, that's just asking for paralysis. That's just telling people to sit down and be quiet and watch and see what happens. And that is not the recipe for this moment. We need to be obviously alert. We need to be watching what's going on. We need to be responding in whatever way we can. As goofy as it sounds, and I know this is going to sound pointless, I will still tell people that they should contact their members of Congress if they're pissed off about something, not because I think this will dramatically, oh no, you're right, I guess I have to change my mind. But here's the thing, thinking on the most self-interested level, if you're a member of Congress and a lot of people are contacting you, big numbers, saying, we hate this, that member of Congress is going to worry about losing their job, right? On the most fundamental level, if there's a lot of opposition to something, just based on their desire for self-preservation, that can be heard, right? So as much as that seems pointless, oh, well, my member of Congress is blah, blah, they'll never listen. No, but if there's a loud, sustained response to something, loud and sustained enough that you can't ignore it, that's job threatening. That's potentially politics changing, and that matters. No matter how authoritarian we may move on the right, at the moment, the fact remains that public opinion still matters. It matters as long as we're willing to acknowledge that and use it and speak up and push back. We can't assume that it already doesn't matter. that's just paralysis. That's again, sitting down and being quiet. And that is not where we should be at the moment. So along the lines of things we should be doing that may seem trivial, but that I think fundamentally won't be, if indeed, I shouldn't even say if, as we're watching things that are authoritarian in nature happen on a high level, local activity is going to be really important. Local organization, local change, taking part in local government, really, really important. Think about the ways in which during a Democratic administration, state governments who had Republican majorities were doing all kinds of things to get in the way of elections, to make the, cut down on the number of voters, all of the ways in which there's been a lot happening on the state level, despite what's happening on the national level. It's that dynamic that I'm talking about when I say, get busy locally. Do it on your own, but even better, get together with people who agree with you and come up with a plan of action. And, I have written down in front of me local organization. And I realize, talking about words and what things mean or don't, organization, let's organize, can seem vague and daunting at the same time. Like, what do you mean, let's organize? Like what? I'm not a labor organizer, right? I'm not someone who knows about any of that kind of stuff. What does that mean? Let's organize. Like that takes dedicated activists, and I'm not one of those. Well, first of all, if you have strong feelings about what's happening and you regularly meet with a group of friends who talk about this and try and come up with ways to have an impact on a local level, guess what? You're an activist, right? There's no test you have to pass to be an activist. Being an activist means actively getting involved in expressing your viewpoint and opposing what seems unfair. Activist. Again, all of these words, activist, democracy, they're words and they matter, but the reality is that you shouldn't feel daunted by the idea of organizing because it can be very small. It can be a small community of people. I mean, we're actually, a reasonably sized community of people. But if I met every other week with a bunch of people and we each had like a job, like my job for this week is to report on X and you'll report on Y, and we'll watch what's happening. We'll get together, we'll talk for an hour, we'll have a glass of wine in our hands, and we'll say, okay, here's what happened here, here's what happened here, here's what happened here. What can we do on the local front to express what we think, to get in the way, to get people to listen? Imagine if all over the country, people did just that. That's organizing, that's activism. So don't feel daunted by the seeming enormity of what we're facing because local matters, small matters, individual even matters. And it's so easy, and I understand it, to think this is just trivial stuff. It's, throwing sand in the gears. Well, first of all, yeah, that's all it is. Even that's good. Throw some sand in the gears of authoritarianism. Thumbs up. But really, don't start out by assuming nothing matters. We don't know that. That's the flip side of extreme contingency. We don't know what's coming. We don't know what it's going to be like. We got a good idea and it's not going to be pretty and it's going to get worse. We don't know. Well, guess what? We also don't know what works best against that. And the only way we'll find that out is if we try things, if we speak up, if we get together, if we are creative politically in this moment, like we want the Democrats to be. Think about what's going on around us and think about ways maybe that we haven't done before, or maybe that we haven't thought of before, that can be effective in expressing what we're thinking and pushing back, opposing what's going down, exposing what's going down, making it clear what's happening in a way that it's pretty hard to deny, a way back with evidence, a way that's footnoted, a way that points to specific things being done, exposing. You think about the dynamics of the late 19th century, the Gilded Age, when you had, very, very wealthy people doing whatever the heck it is they wanted. That's, again, it's hard to deny what Gilded Age means. Well, guess what had an impact on that and ushered in a new era? People who stood up and exposed what was happening. People like the muckrakers, journalists, reformers, who stood up and said, you know what's happening in these factories? Let's talk about child labor. Let's talk about things. Here, we'll take photographs of what's happening. We'll show you in every way we can what's happening. The progressive era followed the Gilded Age in part because of people who stood up, photographers, journalists, and just exposed what was happening in credible, believable, powerful ways. That's what I'm talking about when I say we don't know what's going to have a big impact. Photographer taking photographs of child labor couldn't have said to himself at the time, well, I know this is going to have an impact, but it was powerful, and it was probably more powerful than even he would have expected once it got out. So being creative at this moment politically, thinking like an activist, meaning be active. What can we do? How can we get together to do it? Not feeling paralyzed in this moment, but being willing to try things out that we haven't tried before, because there really is no telling what might catch on in the weirdness of the dynamics of this political moment. And I'm going to end by talking about what I have been talking about a lot. I know I've been like opposition party, blah, blah, blah. And the other thing I talk about is community, right? Because obviously underlying everything I'm saying here, I realize I'm a few minutes over, but I'm almost done. Community is another one of these big, broad, general words that doesn't seemingly have a meaning. What it means is if there are people who you connect with regularly, who you care about and who care about you, who you can talk to about what's going on, who you know that you can turn to if things become tricky, and you will be there if they want to turn to you. Community, both for taking action and for standing up against difficulties that may come, is so important right now. I feel like I've been training myself for this moment because I've been talking about a sense of a we matters. We watched that we get stabbed in the heart during the pandemic. When you would think that a pandemic that's killing people would have gotten people to come together and say, yikes, we better do something together to get to oppose, to stop the spread of the pandemic. And instead we got, I don't want to wear a mask. You're taking away my rights, right? Suddenly we saw, even on the most fundamental level of life and death, was it a really effective we taking place? So we're not doing well on we power at the moment, but it really matters. And we should do what we can on our level with our friends to create and embrace communities that can help us do things, help us take action, help us resist things, help us take care of each other. That matters so much. And right now, as we're sitting in front of our computer screens, like I'm asking you to do, it's so easy to be isolated. And I can understand that. I spend a lot of time sitting at home when I'm not like grading papers, like looking around, what's online? Let me read the news. Oh, I'll play a stupid game online. Oh no, okay, maybe I'll watch something on TV. And all of those things are isolating. And that's not necessarily good. But if we're aware of that and we are making it our deliberate choice to be sure to connect with people and have a sense of community, a real sense of community, that's going to be important in fundamental ways. And I encourage all of us to do that in our own way, as we do every week when we meet here on History Matters. We cannot sleepwalk into authoritarianism. We have to focus, be alert, watch, act, get together to oppose what's going on, to expose what's going on in whatever way we can. Do not believe that there's nothing to be done. I understand the power and the impact of what authoritarianism is. I also understand the danger of saying, oh, well, there's nothing to be done. Okay, I'm a little over. I got a little wound up. Oh, mug. Okay. So I have two mugs, which I think I'm going to open them for the first time, use them for the first time in the new apartment. I had one mug that I got ready to use, and then as I was sitting here and we were beginning, I realized another mug might be better. So I'll show you the mug that I have my coffee in, and then I'll show you the other mug. And this won't be a surprise because, like I said, I have like three mugs. I've been using them every week. Okay, so the mug I obviously used. I was feeling Mr. Grumpy. I can't hear you,
Oh,
Annie. You're muted. I was feeling Mr. Grumpy, so he was what I reached for. And then as I began talking, I realized
contingency.
contingency should have been the mug. Partly because contingency is what we're talking about, and partly don't be verklempt. Remember contingency. Thank you, Carolee. So that should have been the mug. Actually, I have all three of my mugs here, and they all apply. The last mug I have here,
Oh, we got a 3 mug day.
when it's the first New Year, 3 mugs. When we
Here's
fight, we
3 mug
win.
day.
That's it. That's
Wow,
that. So all of my 3 mugs apply to this moment.
that's
You
funny.
guys are going to go bonkers when I get in my new space and there are different mugs.
I
I'm
know.
going to go bonkers. The choice. Okay.
All right. So we've got questions popping left and right. All right.
Okay.
So Dave has one that's very timely. He says, how would House Democrats demonstrate opposition today in the electing of the new Speaker of the House?
Really good question. Well, I mean, one thing they could do, so I don't know. Well, Americans are probably not aware of the fact that the rules that the new Congress has adopted have made it more difficult to oust a speaker. Surprise. So there's one case in which I don't think standing up and saying, guess what, there's been a change to the rules is going to have a big impact. But I do think Democrats pointing out loudly, verbally, what's at stake on the floor. We don't support this, and here's why. This speaker has done X, Y, and Z. Don't we want a speaker who does Q? Don't we want a speaker who like believes everybody here matters? Don't we? And of course, there are going to be people who say, no, I want that precisely. This guy reflects what I want. I'm not saying that there's magical words and someone's going to stand up, but I do think Democrats should not just sit there and vote. I think they should be clear about what the stakes are, about what the speaker does, about what a different speaker could do. Every moment can be a spotlight moment. And it might be a pointless spotlight moment, but you don't know that going in. So part of what Democrats can do now is use this as an exposing moment, as a spotlight moment to talk about what exactly people are voting for when they're voting for speaker. And again, point out the simple fact, and this is a fact. I think this was released, I can't remember if it was Wednesday or today, the new rules for the House, that now it's harder to oust a speaker. That's worth mentioning. Guess what? It now, when you get a speaker, it's going to be harder to throw them out. What does that mean? What does that suggest? Let's talk about it. So, what I saw, Eddie, I need new glasses. You said, I have to open chat. You said bathroom rules go into effect. And I thought it said, this shows you about me thinking about renovating my apartment. I thought it said bathroom tiles go into effect. And I was like, bathroom tiles?
No, the ridiculous rule that they made because of the one new.
Yes, which is ridiculous. But I saw bathroom tiles, and I'm sorry, but
That's
this
all
is where
right.
my mind is right now. At any rate, so that's not a, here's my 5-step plan for what they should do, but this is an expose and oppose moment, and it should be used for both of those purposes. It should not be a sit down and say no moment. And it would be really effective. This would be a nice moment for some of these younger politicians on the left to speak out with a different kind of voice in a different kind of way and see what it does. Try it out, right? I really do think we're at a moment where generational change matters. And I'm not saying throw out the old and welcome in the new. I'm saying welcome in the new. And it feels that talk about resistance, that there's some resistance to that. And that gives the impression to the American public of, nope, politics is normal. We're just going on. We're doing what we do. While a lot of things that don't seem normal are happening on the other side. That's not useful.
All right, we've got tons of good questions.
Oh,
Deb,
I want to read what Frida just posted because it's worth saying. So now it used to be one member could propose ousting a speaker. Now you need 9. And quote, while it makes it harder to oust a speaker, it does not completely remove the threat. And that's worth saying. So yes.
All right. So Danny, our good friend Danny, says 2 things seemed wrapped up to me. One, the authoritarian trends that are mostly in Europe, but also Brazil, South Korea. And he feels like those are kind of also intertwined with their people gobbling up disinformation. So it's hard for us to get to discern what really are the facts. So he says, are we at the tip of this global trend? And how do we fight back with the disinformation going around to make a more resistant global community?
Well, so we're in a lot of global trends, right? There's a global anti-democracy trend, and whenever I think about the idea that we tend to think about the United States in isolation, I think about early American scholarship for a while. Everything was like, let's look at early America. Oh, the revolution. Oh, the Alien and Sedition Act. And for a long time, people weren't saying, England had their own version of a sedition act. Whatever was happening in America didn't happen in isolation. We're at a moment when there's an anti-democratic trend worldwide, for sure. This could be yet another one of these trends happening around the world that it's important that we acknowledge it isn't just us. Now, by saying that, that doesn't mean we're off the hook. Oh, well, it's not just us, so there's nothing we can do. It matters. It actually makes it more important because it suggests here's a moment where these kinds of things appear to be vulnerable to change for better and worse. We have to be alert to the worst part, but we can take advantage of the making things better part.
Yeah. All right. Freda says, I mostly focus on state and local issues, but my congressman doesn't care because he's in a safe Republican district. So I don't know how the question about national issues would work into that. So she feels like no matter what she does trying to do local and state, they don't listen to her because they know they don't have to.
Well, yeah, but if there are school board meetings and no one stands up and talks about what they want, okay, then people are going to just, particularly if people feel they're Republican and they feel there's no opposition, they're just going to steamroller on ahead and do what they want. Locally, it actually, in some ways, matters more because loud voices will be in the way. They will be heard. And allowing things to be unopposed on a local level, even if you don't think you're going to have a huge impact, that matters too. Even if you don't think standing up at a school board meeting is going to change anything in a place that's so solidly red that no one cares what anyone else says, if there's no one there to speak up about what's objective, what people dislike about it, what they are objecting to, then it's as though there's no objections at all, as though it's acceptable. We don't want to suggest that things we find outrageous are not outrageous. We don't want to make it seem as though they're normal, as though they're acceptable. And the only way to register that is to speak up and to organize on a local level. I also think on a local level, and again, the joys of federalism, different states, different local communities, different ways of doing things, that even though you might be in a solidly red area, again, there is no telling what kind of thing you can do with a group of people that either will be particularly loud or will be particularly getting in the way or will register above and beyond your local community. When I said be creative, like I really mean be creative and stop the naysaying and just try things. This is such a weirdly contingent moment. We don't know what's going to work, but we should be trying things. We should be trying things to see what gets an impact. We're living in an age where constantly something happens, often with technology. And we're like, oh, you can do that? Like that can happen? Really? Like the last question about, I didn't really explicitly address misinformation or disinformation. Yeah, there's a global problem with that. But just sort of sitting back and saying, gosh, that's a problem. Well, that's useful. But realizing that that's global and that we need to be thinking about how to address it. And if we can get people together to think intelligently about things we can do to address it, at least we're acting, at least we're thinking. We're not just sitting and saying, oh, well, it's so tempting to, oh, well, I understand that. We're all tired. I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted above and beyond the fact that I'm moving. I'm exhausted. We all are. You know, I'm guessing a lot of us are not watching the news as closely as we were because we're kind of OD'd on it. Like I have not been watching cable news as much as I did because I right now just don't have the strength for that, although I'm still reading and keeping up on things. I understand that we're tired and I understand that we feel defeated. And I understand that for many of us, it seems as though the inherently wrong thing happened. I understand all of that. But that doesn't mean that we should permanently surrender to that. I think a lot of people have been saying things like, you know, okay, like rest, get caught up, reinforce, you know, get yourself going again. We are all tired already and we're heading into a fight, but we're heading into it together. And I know that sounds hokey in general, but I think that really matters. You know, we're here every week in part because we think taking part in this conversation, hearing about these things and hashing out ideas and questions matters. You wouldn't be here if you didn't think it mattered, right? And we don't know how it matters. I don't know. But again, don't toss out possibilities without trying and pushing and opposing. There, you know, Annie, that's great. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. That's wonderful. Yeah. This is not a moment to be naysaying that can never work. That is really not useful at this particular moment. And it's a weird moment, and there might be a weird solution, or at least a weird effective measure to what's going on now, and we might not know it yet.
Yeah. All right. Our good buddy Dave says, what medium will be effective communicating the oppositional message? I can't imagine it's the New York Times or Washington Post or Meet the Press. Your thoughts on what medium needs to be employed, utilized to be oppositional?
And here's a case in which I'll toss out ideas, but I am not going to be the world's most informed person about this. But I think, you know, it is true that at this point, the New York Times and the Washington Post and Meet the Press are kind of seemingly not only have been guilty of seeming misinformation by like doing everything that, you know, Biden's too old, let's throw him out, and not doing the same thing for Trump. There are any number of ways in which we are disillusioned with those forms of media, but also in a sense, this will be controversial, but I'll say it anyway. They feel like the old way. They feel like old school. I'm not saying that's bad, but I'm saying we're in a moment where we got to try some new things as well. So yeah, I think I'm not saying that those forms of media aren't important. I'm not saying that they don't matter, but what else could it be? Everyone keeps saying independent media. And the problem is independent media individually, they're small and people are constantly asking each other. I just saw someone do that here, right? Like, so what are you reading? What are you watching? Where are you getting your news? And we don't know where to turn yet. People ask me that all the time. So what do you do? What do you watch? What do you read? And I'm sampling all over the place. So certainly it would be great if someone came and said, independent news outlet and just put everything in there, right? You want some independent news that isn't old school. Here are a bunch of places you can go and read and pull it together like on a website. And granted, there's going to be all kinds of different information and clashing ideas, but it'll be one place, one-stop shopping where people can go and try and get a sense of what's going on. You would think on a sort of general objective level that having access to so much information at this moment would be great. It's so confusing and it can be so counter useful because you can get lost in the stream of fact. Just this morning, right? I had read some things about the new rules for the House. And then before we went on this morning, I was like, I better look them up because I need more specific information. And sure enough, what I had read from what felt like a credible source was wrong. And so I backed away from some of what I was going to say. There are things being put up now. Yeah, there's all kinds of ideas for the press. This is another way in which we need to be thinking now. where would we turn? Where should we turn? Again, right now there hasn't yet been anyone who's made like in some way like a list, like newmedia.com, right? You go here if you want to, whatever. That's not very good marketing, but you know what I mean? There hasn't been a lot of organization offering people an idea of where else they can turn. And I don't have the answer to that. Yeah, BBC and CBC, like I do think about other countries. I'm figuring out now what TV I'm going to have access to in my new apartment. And part of me is like, well, I better have BBC because coming in from the outside, that actually is very helpful.
Yeah, I no matter what, I have to have a PBS channel. I watch the PBS News, and BBC. All right, Kevin Brady says we need some unified messages to express the opposition to the abandonment of our Constitution's 14th Amendment provision preventing insurrectionists from holding office. Do you think there's a worthwhile message to rally around, or is there a more effective way to frame that opposition?
Well, I think finding a more effective message is important. I just don't think I can poof and invent it right here. But that's
Right.
part of what I'm talking about when I say to be creative. You know, we should be, people should be in this moment thinking these ideas. What can we do? What kind of message? What kind of outlet? How can we get people, point people towards a way to reliably inform themselves, create ways of communicating things that are straightforward and evidence-based and blunt. You know, again, I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. I'm not an insider when it comes to politics. So I can't tell you what's happening, but what it feels like from the outside is not a heck of a lot yet. Some things, but we need to see some loud, organized stepping forward of people saying, okay, that's right. Actually, Katja, a lot of people have been going from the Washington Post. The Atlantic is hiring many people. Again, interesting things are happening all over the place, which is part of what I'm talking about here. We're going to be, I guess what I would say, a part of it's related to what I just said, but not only to be alert to what's happening on the right, but be alert to the changes around you and new ways of informing yourself and try things out yourself. See what works or doesn't and engage. I mean, just this little stream chat, right? People are like, this is good. That's not, this is actually effective, right? If everyone had access to this, and granted, there's all kinds of information, but you would walk away if you beamed in and read this. Oh, here are a couple things I didn't think about. BBC, CBC, The Guardian. Huh, okay. It's, we don't know how to get people that information, and they aren't getting that information. We have to really, again, be creative. And I don't have the instant poof, here's the creative way to communicate this. But people who know more than I do about the media, the press, engaging with the public, really, I hope, are full bore trying to figure out ways to get to engage with and grab at the public so they can see and hear information in a way that they don't have to like, I shall now sit down and look for information, right? That they know where to go, where to get information from. Okay, I'll stop talking because there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, there are. So John Howell, who's in Boise, Idaho, says that one way to get organized as an individual is to get involved in your local party. He says he's, for example, in the Democratic Party. And he said, even though Idaho's a very red state, that he still feels like supporting the party that is giving the, message that he believes in. He wanted to know, have you seen evidence that local party activism can actually lead to change in a national direction or at the state level, given that he's in a very red state? I think that goes to the comment earlier about, the local politician doesn't listen to me because he's in a safe red.
Yeah, but you're totally right that the local politician might not listen, but there's going to be a local party organization that's opposed, right? Imagine if suddenly a lot of people joined up really willing to work together for that opposing party organization in a red state. That could actually really matter. That's a great idea of kind of what we're talking about here. I also, someone just said something I want to repeat. Yeah, I assume it's James Downs, not Jim. I always forget, forgive me. I think a lot of folks have been caught off guard by how many media outlets and media moguls turned right after being acquired by wealthy right-wingers. It's fair to be confused as we work out what's next. Yes, right? We've watched a lot of people suddenly throw money into the Trump inauguration, head down to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring. People who, if you'd asked us, maybe we would have said maybe, but that trend has been quite a thing to watch. So yeah, it is fair to be confused as we work out what's next, and as we watch people very clearly take a side, who we might not have expected to take a side so clearly. Okay, if that's where they are, then that's where they are, and I'd rather know than not know. So now, how will I recalculate to find someone who has not so clearly said, I'm on this side, who maybe is still out in the middle saying, I don't like that. And here I am trying to figure it out. Or I want to oppose. Watching people expose their loyalty, that matters. And we've watched a lot of that in recent weeks.
Yeah. Okay, Carolyn Latin. That is a new name. I don't know if Carolyn's been with us before, but I don't recall seeing her in the Q&A. But she said that 2017, oh, bless you.
Easy on the truth. Okay.
She said that in 2017, the Women's March felt great, but what good did it do?
I know.
Wondering what your take is on that.
Yeah, so I took part in it. It felt wonderful. It felt empowering. I was wearing a t-shirt from I don't remember what the big march in Washington was for women, what year that was. It's a long time ago. I have a t-shirt from it. And I wore that t-shirt to this march. And yeah, it felt like, it didn't get much press coverage. It felt like it didn't matter. I found that supremely disappointing and depressing. So it's part of why I haven't been saying, let's march. Now, I will say, images that we've been seeing from other countries of massive numbers of people in the streets having an impact because of the sheer number. Oh, there you go, 2017, but an older one, way back, 1990 something. Anyway, whatever it is. Yeah, I'll step back because now I'm getting totally caught up in the chat rather than answering the question. I'm not going to say that marching doesn't matter. Marching in big numbers matters. I do think that the fact that it was women marching helped people dismiss it as, oh, well, it's just women, which is always what people do. It was important that it happened. It didn't have the impact it should have, and that in part that's because it didn't get press play and it wasn't taken seriously, and that infuriated me. That certainly counts as something that we should do. We shouldn't dismiss it as, oh, it doesn't matter because it didn't have an impact that time. And again, think about the images we've seen from other countries, like was it South Korea? Where was it that military rule was temporarily declared?
South Korea.
South Korea. And the pushback and the images that I mean, that was quite a thing to see. That was powerful. That was powerful enough that the world noticed, and that had an impact. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about, is don't assume there's nothing you can do. And don't immediately dismiss things, even though logically you can do what I'm doing right now, which is, well, the Women's March didn't matter, so why do that? I'm open to all. I'm willing to hear all suggestions as far as what we can do, and I think there are, a million shades of active that we should be trying out right now with energy to see what really works. And different things will work in different places with different people. And we're just going to have to try things out because we are in a moment of extreme contingency.
And A Million Shades of Active needs to go on the list of good band names. So somebody please put that in the chat so that we don't forget it. Okay, so our good buddy Troy says, perhaps FDR's first 100 days would be a helpful thing for us to look at for tips to handle this moment. But he's asking, is the strongest pull for most people to see themselves in the old adage, spare the rod, spoil the child, where they always see themselves as the rightful rod bearers and the rest of the world as children?
Repeat that for me again.
He asked, is the strongest pull for people to see themselves with the spare the rod, spoil the child as, well, my point of view is the rod and everybody else is the child?
Well, I mean, it goes all the way back to the beginning of the United States under the Constitution, that one side was saying, we represent the people, we represent everyone, we represent what's right, and they are only representing themselves, and they're in opposition, and they're bad, and they're nasty, and that makes sense that that's always the case. I think, and you correct me, I think, but that question partly getting, well, I don't know, is that getting partly at violence, or is that getting at,
Sure, Troy put it in, so maybe he wants
yeah,
to.
Troy, explain a little better what it means so I can be sure I'm addressing it.
I don't see it pop up. Superior mindset, he says.
So people thinking they have the superior
Right,
mindset.
like my point of view is the right one, and the rest of y'all are the children, and I need to school y'all on it.
Oh, well,
saying.
sure. I mean, so we can see people doing that on all sides, right? But that gets back to how we're doing what we're doing. Being condescending at this moment, I know. I know everything. I know what we should do. It's not going to be helpful. It really isn't. It's going to be off-putting. And I think people have been saying that about the left, right? That there are some people on the left who sound sometimes condescending towards the people. Anyone sounding condescending right now is not going to be a good thing, because this should be a moment where the public realizes what they think and do matters.
And Troy did add that the rod bearers always want to be punitive, right? It's very heavy-handed, kind of.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
All right. Daniel is asking, why the heck do so many women still vote for people like Trump? He said it's embarrassing enough that the number of men doing it, but the women voting baffles me. It would be like a Jewish person voting for the KKK, he says.
Yeah, I can't address intelligently in a short amount of time. I find it stunningly frustrating. All I can say is that as a starting point, there are probably a lot of white women who believe that the status quo is safe, and if they go along with where we've been, they're going to be okay because they're okay right now. And that might be what it feels like. I don't know. I think certainly some of those women are women who believe that they're doing perfectly okay in the system right now. And they're doing perfectly okay in the system right now, in part because the men they're with and the men in control have made it so they'll be okay. Other people might not be okay, but they're okay now, they will be okay. But that's a deeper question than my very minimal answer deserves.
I think those ads we saw, they were kind of late to the game, but remember like the last 2 weeks before the election, there were all these ads that popped up with women going to the poll, and then it said your husband doesn't know who you really voted for. I think that's exactly who they were trying to appeal to.
Exactly. And
I thought those were some pretty.
That was really, it will be interesting to see if that had an impact, if there's a way to measure that, but I found that really smart and really fascinating. Yeah, that's a great thing to bring in here. I just want to say, Susan said the public doesn't have a clue. Yeah, but that's why we need to be thinking about how to do this better. I mean, I couldn't have talked, speechified, yelled, traveled, webcasted, written more than I did in recent years. Maybe I could have done more, but I sure did a lot. And I don't know what impact it had. I'll never know. But clearly there were some ways in which what we were doing was less effective than it could have been. And we need to be figuring out why and what ways we can get through to at least some people. I don't know if we can pierce the Fox bubble, but we can certainly we can communicate with more people. I mean, that's always, as a historian, my constant take as a historian is I'm going to engage with as broad a public as I possibly can. I want to talk to my fellow historians. I want to take part in the academic, the scholarly conversation. I am part of that conversation, but I also believe some of us academics should be engaging with the public, and there are big groups of the public who are open and eager and willing and thirsty for that kind of historical, factual content.
I mean, it's only, someone had put this earlier in the chat. It's only been really the last, I'd say less than 5 years, that even K-12 teachers were welcomed at conferences like this. Like, I never even hardly ever heard of the AHA when I was still a classroom teacher, right? Or SHEER or
Yeah,
Like that was for y'all, you and Ed and all your little buddies. And then we had our NCSSs and our NCHEs. And I really feel like it was after 2016 when everything happened, like after Charlottesville happened and the first Trump administration and Black Lives Matter, that all of a sudden these groups are like, wait a minute, if we work together,
right, right.
I get
Well,
better. And I think
exactly.
that's been a silver lining in all of
It
this.
has been. And there was, at some of those conferences, first there was talk that was like, we should be getting together to affect things here because teachers on all levels are being affected. And when I was president of SHEER, that was like a big thing for me. I wasn't the first person to do it. I definitely wasn't the only person to do it. But part of what I really wanted was to find ways to bring in, and SHEER is continuing on in that direction. And you're right, that's so important. Now the AHA or the OAH, as educators, we need to have each other's back. So as
And
history educators, yeah,
And I mean, literally, my whole job came out of that. That's all Ed's trying to do. Like what we're doing with New American History, that's the whole reason that he started all that. So,
yeah,
and the reason I think that this has continued on way past the pandemic is it works.
yeah, yeah, that's true.
So, all right, it's 9 after 11. There's
Gosh,
a few
okay.
questions left, but
Yeah, I know people have
time.
places to go. Okay, I guess I'm gonna say what I always say, which is if I could get the questions sent to me very often, they're sent to me and I look and they're not different enough from what we talked about that I end up not taking them in, but I always want to see them.
Right.
So, John, if you don't mind, finding a way to get me, those questions, that would be great. Um, I'm already getting prompted. I like people like mug, and now they're saying poof, poof. Okay. So for those of you who haven't been here before, let me explain to you what happens now. We are now going to head into the after party. What that means is that we will no longer be recording this conversation, which means we can be even freer and easier with what we're saying than we have been going along. If you beamed in through the NCHE website, stay right where you are, and poof, you will be in the after party. I don't know if anyone's watching from Facebook today, but if you were, you would have to go to ncheteach.org/conversations. So I won't repeat that as I normally do because I don't think people are on Facebook. Actually, I will. ncheteach.org/conversations. And then YouTube poof will be in the after party. Okay, so before we do that, I want to thank my wonderful partner in crime, Annie. I want to thank John for being here. I want to thank NCHE and Claire and Jessica. I want to thank all of you guys for coming here week after week. Next time we meet is going to be close to the 250th, right? I mean, and we're still figuring out. So watch to see what we're going to do because we talked about having a History Matters and So Do Cocktails moment to honor that. So we're going to work out what comes next. We will have a normal episode, but we'll see what else happens around that. But in the meantime, everybody, have a good week. Be there for each other. Some of you might be starting school. If teachers out or students out there, if so, I give you all fortitude. I have one more week left. Annie has a session at the AHA Sunday at 10:30 a.m. I have to advertise that because she is my partner in crime. At any rate, thank you all for coming. Thank you for engaging in the conversation of democracy on a Friday morning. We're going to keep having the conversation of democracy as long as I can converse. We will be finding a way to do this.
Right.
And okay, we can head off into the after party. Thank you guys all for being here.
Yay.